we're moving more into clinical aspects of different things the latter part of this morning. But wasn't that fun? My. And I am very pleased to introduce Ms. Kathleen Small, who is a parent advocate and the Medical Outreach Alliance Coordinator for the Down Syndrome Connection of the Bay Area. She's also on the board of the Down Syndrome Diagnosis Network and works with Bay Area hospitals and medical providers to help support families who are welcoming a child with Down syndrome. Kathleen, welcome for the first time to our podium. Glad to have you.
Hello. All right. So apparently the first thing that I need to tell you is that I have nothing to disclose, but that my husband works for Genentech. But I couldn't tell you what he does. It's something really, really, really dull about regulatory FDA paperwork. So anyway, no disclosures. So you can see here our goals for this presentation. Let me tell you a little bit about how I got involved with Down Syndrome Connection. I have two children. My older one is autistic, and my younger one has Down syndrome, both boys. When my younger one was born, we got a birth diagnosis at the hospital, and our diagnosis experience was not terrific. And one of the first things I thought was, wow, this didn't have to be this way. Someday I'm going to try to do something to make sure it doesn't happen this way for other parents. So then I connected with Down Syndrome Connection, and we went to a lot of their programs and that kind of thing. And then after a while, we got to talking, and they said, you know, we need to ramp up our medical outreach because we've been in this area for 20 years, and there's a lot of people at the hospitals that don't even know we're out there. And I said, sign me up. That's exactly what I've been wanting to do. So that's what I've been doing. I've been going around to the hospitals and to medical groups, some obstetrics groups, some genetics groups, giving presentations. And I generally tailor it for whoever I'm talking to. So when I'm talking to doctors, I usually leave out the slides that are like, what is a trisomy? Because they all know what a trisomy is. I don't need to tell them that. When I'm talking to people that maybe aren't as familiar, I give a basic overview. So today, because we've got a mix, I'm going to give a basic overview, and Dr. Trotter is going to speak after me and in a lot more detail since he's spent much of his practice working with people with disabilities. So I will gloss over it, and if it is a review for you, I apologize, but I will try to keep that part quick. So here's our little Down Syndrome 101. It is the most common genetic condition occurring in 1 in 691 births in the US, so we think. An estimated 6,000 births a year, and more than 200,000 people with Down syndrome are estimated to be living in the United States right now. This is the most recent number. Until recently, they thought it was somewhere around 400,000, and then they just did a study that came out last year saying it's closer to 200,000. It's present in all races, all socioeconomic backgrounds, equally common in both genders. And there's no known cause for it. It's just extra genetic material in the egg or the sperm. And it's present from the moment of conception. So it's nothing that a mother did while she was pregnant or didn't do while she was pregnant. There's no blame to be placed. Sometimes parents feel like, what did I do wrong? It just happens. It just is. So there's 3 types of Down syndrome. Almost all of them are trisomy 21, which is just an extra copy of the 21st chromosome. The less common ones are translocation, where a piece of the chromosome breaks off and usually attaches to another chromosome, or mosaicism, where not every cell in the body is affected. In trisomy 21, every single cell in the body is affected. In mosaicism, not all are, and the percentage that are affected in individuals differs. But neither of those second 2 types is very common at all. Physical characteristics, not every person with Down syndrome is going to show all of these. Some people show more than others. In general, most of them tend to have low muscle tone, hypotonia, so they're the kind of floppy babies that sort of melt into you when you pick them up. They have the epicanthal folds on the inner corner of the eyes that give it an almond shape. Flat nasal bridge, that's something that sometimes is seen in like the 20-week ultrasound. I know parents have said that it's been pointed out to them sometimes in their anatomy scan. Small or unusually shaped ears, excess skin at the back of the neck, that too sometimes shows up in an ultrasound, not always. Tongue that protrudes or seems large compared to the size of the mouth. So the mouth can actually be pretty small, but the tongue can be normal sized, which makes it appear bigger. And then with the low muscle tone, your tongue being a muscle, of course, it can be harder for them to keep it in like most of us just naturally do. They actually have to work at that. So that's where you get a little bit of the tongue protrusion going on. White spots on the colored part of the eye called brush field spots. Those are actually really lovely if you've ever seen them. They make the eyes kind of sparkle. They're really beautiful. Single deep crease across the palm of the hand and an extra space between the first and second toes called the sandal gap. Like I said, not all of these are going to show up in every person with Down syndrome. Not all are going to show up in that ultrasound. My ultrasound showed absolutely nothing, but my son does have a very flat little nasal bridge, so it didn't show up in there. Medical concerns in babies and young children. So some babies with Down syndrome are born with absolutely no health concerns. Down syndrome is the only thing they're born with other than a typical child, or otherwise they're like a typical child. But 50% are born with congenital heart problems. So obviously this is really scary for parents. It doesn't entirely have to be. I mean, a heart condition is always going to be scary, but we've come so far that so many of these babies have a perfectly successful heart surgery, and yeah, it's terrifying for the family to go through it, but they come out the other side. The children live a long and healthy life. Hearing problems, semi-common. Obstructive sleep apnea, again. The intestinal issues, gastrointestinal atresia and Hirschsprung's, the atresia will show up before they leave the hospital. Don't quote me on this, but I think in virtually every case. And I have heard of people with Hirschsprung's not knowing it before they leave the hospital, but it's probably going to be apparent fairly early on. Thyroid dysfunction, pretty common. It often shows up later, but sometimes in young kids. My son has had it almost his whole life, so it does show up in really young kids. Leukemia is the one that scares all parents of kids with Down syndrome, and if you see kids with Down syndrome in your practice or in your medical office, you're undoubtedly going to see a parent who rushes in with a child with a rash and goes, "Is it petechia? Could it be leukemia?" Because this is what we all worry about, and this is what we take pictures of and send them around to our friends on the internet and go, "Does this look like petechia to you?" We get over it. Eventually we realize that some of us have kids that are just rashy kids that get a rash every time they get a fever, and it doesn't necessarily mean leukemia. But I will admit that some of us are quite paranoid about it, so you will probably hear about it. Nursing and feeding difficulties, also very common, but not insurmountable. There are a lot of kids with Down syndrome who are able to successfully breastfeed. For most, it does take some work, and there are lactation consultants that are skilled in teaching the parents how to work with this. A lot of it has to do with the low muscle tone in the mouth. It's hard for them to form that good suction with the breast when they're trying to breastfeed, and it just takes time. It takes building up that muscle tone, building up the endurance. A lot of them are very sleepy babies, especially if they have a heart condition, and they fall asleep while nursing all the time. But if a parent really wants to nurse a child with Down syndrome, chances are they will eventually be able to if they have the proper support. In older children and adults, atlantoaxial instability is an issue with the cervical spine. It's not really that common as far as I know. I do not know many people with it, but it does exist. And usually they say if a child with Down syndrome is going to get involved in something like gymnastics or horseback riding that could have a lot of impact on the neck, they should have that x-ray to make sure that they don't have the AAI. They used to say it should be done by age 3. The most recent guidelines I've seen said, well, you can maybe wait till 5. That might actually be better. So it seems to be a little bit in flux from what I've seen. Vision problems, fairly common. Autism, we all know that's rising among the entire population. And in Down syndrome, it is more common in boys than in girls, just like in the standard population. And it does seem to be a bit on the rise in that population as well. Precocious puberty, early onset menopause, this is not going to happen to everyone with Down syndrome, but it can happen. Celiac disease, not terrifically common, but more common in Down syndrome than in the typical population. So it is something to be aware of if a patient is presenting with a lot of gastrointestinal issues. Dementia and Alzheimer's disease, next to leukemia, I'll tell you this is the other thing we all fear, because it's a horrible thought knowing that you are going to see your child slide into dementia someday. My personal hope as the parent of a young child is that I've got about 35 years before we start to see signs of this, and that's a lot of time for medicine to advance. So anyone out there in research, you want to work on this, I'm all for it. So the AAP has guidelines for the recommended screenings at children with Down syndrome's well baby, well child checks. Your medical office probably has them. If not, Down Syndrome Connection has them. We can provide them to you. So the diagnosis can happen prenatally at birth, or in some cases several months later. Birth diagnosis can be suspected, but obviously they can't be confirmed until a karyotype has come back. Sometimes it's pretty obvious, but you can never know for sure till you see that nice chromosome array. If a family asks what type of Down syndrome their child has before the karyotype is concerned, you may try to dance around it, but I know that some families, like me, are really pushy and want to know. It's probably trisomy 21. And I will tell you that most parents of kids with Down syndrome, before they know, are like, oh, well, it might be mosaicism in mine. He doesn't really look like he has it that much. It might be. And that's what they all hope for, because if there's not as many cells affected, the chances for their child to have a more typical life seem better. So we all do hope for it, but the reality is that in most cases it's probably going to be trisomy 21, and every parent is going to react to the news differently. Most of them tend to go through that typical cycle of grief, denial, bargaining, anger, acceptance, but every person is different. Every person handles this differently. And regardless of when the diagnosis happens, the baby's birth should be celebrated. The one thing that we have found from our members and the statewide surveys we've done is that the hardest thing for parents was when the people around them acted like it was a tragedy, instead of like, you had a baby, congratulations, And it's a strange thing, because it's a congratulations with that sort of side note of, I know this wasn't actually what you planned for when you started your family, but the bottom line is people had a baby, they want to be congratulated. So prenatal diagnosis seems to be happening a lot more now with those tests that are coming out. Harmony, Maternity 21, there's a couple others, I think Verify. I'm forgetting the names of all of them. A lot of parents that we see assume that those are diagnostics that will tell them with absolute certainty whether their child has Down syndrome, and they're not. They're screening tests, and they're pretty reliable as a screening tool. But if a parent wants to know absolutely for certain, they're still going to have to do an amniocentesis to get an absolute answer on that. Let's see. So what can you do? Treat the baby's arrival as a celebration. We already talked about that. That's the biggest thing in this. A baby was born. It's exciting. And congratulate, don't apologize. Like I said, most of the parents that we've talked to have said it really hurt their feelings to hear, I'm sorry. They didn't want to hear, I'm sorry. They knew you were sorry already. They just wanted to hear congratulations. If the baby's been given a name, be sure to use the name, because it shows that you're looking at it as a baby, as a person, instead of as a diagnosis, and that's so important to parents. Other thing you can do is use people-first language. I find this one kind of fascinating, because having one son in the Down syndrome community and one son in the autism community seems to be moving a bit more towards using the diagnosis first. So I have an autistic child as opposed to I have a child with autism. I believe they call it identity first, if I remember right. But the Down syndrome community prefers people first. So I have a baby with Down syndrome, not I have a Down syndrome baby. Tell both parents together. You would think this one is a no-brainer, but I cannot tell you how many of our families said that they were not told together, the mother and father. And I actually wasn't. My husband was across the room, and I had to say, could you go get him, please? Because I was completely overwhelmed. So definitely tell them together if there's any way possible. And remember that mothers and fathers are probably going to respond differently to the news. You know, every person is different, but I think we all know that men and women sometimes tend to process things a little bit differently, so you're probably going to get different responses from each parent. Answer questions honestly and knowledgeably. So you probably know a lot of the answers to things about Down syndrome because it's so common. There's a lot of information out there. But if you don't, call us and we will help you. We will get you the answer because we have it. If you don't, I guarantee it. Allow parents time to bond with their child, but check in regularly to see if they need anything. We had a lot of parents tell us that they were pretty much ignored in the hospital after they had their child with a disability. Just nobody wanted to go anywhere near them, and it was super isolating for them. And recognize that certain statements may seem judgmental. So the one we hear all the time is people hate being asked, did you have prenatal testing? Because they feel that there's this unspoken assumption of, well, if you did, you would have maybe made a different choice. That may not be true. You may say that with no underlying meaning at all, but that's how parents perceive it. So that question is a best one to avoid if possible. And be aware of the medical issues, but you can also emphasize that in many, many, many of these cases, the conditions are very treatable. So like, for example, the heart defects that I talked about, treatable in so many cases. Not all cases, we still see kids die every year from them, but they're much, much more treatable than they used to be. And the same with leukemia. It is terrifying, a terrifying diagnosis for any parent. But there have been some studies that have shown that children with Down syndrome actually respond better to the chemotherapy and treatment for leukemia than typical children. So that's a positive for parents to hold on to if they are facing that. And trust parent intuition. A lot of our parents say that when they bring up a concern with their child with Down syndrome, they're told, oh, that's just Down syndrome. And sometimes it is just Down syndrome, but sometimes it's not Down syndrome. I know from personal experience, my son's thyroid, I kept saying he's got all these symptoms, he's all orange, and they said, well, he eats carrots. I'm like, he doesn't really eat carrots. And I said, you know, he's kind of lethargic. Well, that's just Down syndrome. I'm like, okay, I don't know. So push and push and push. It turns out he did have hypothyroidism, and once we treated it, he's a lovely normal shade of skin tone now. And a different child. So, you know, it may just be Down syndrome. It may be an overreacting parent, but it might not be. So trust the parent's intuition and at least give it a second look. What else can you do? Provide referrals to us and to the regional center. So I have made contact with pretty much every social services department in the birthing hospitals here, and they should have our information. If not, we're easy to find. We have a website. We have an office in the East Bay that's open 24 hours, or not 24. Wow, that would be great, wouldn't it? 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. But if you email, there's usually people answering email at various other times as well. So we are very reachable. We will also deliver a welcome basket with gifts for the family and more information about the services we provide. The welcome packets we have at your hospitals are pretty basic because a lot of the families do not want to be overwhelmed right away, and we totally understand that. So they have a very short informational piece, a little brochure about our organization, and a card for our new parent coordinator who will, you know, meet with them and talk to them. If they want a welcome basket, it comes with a handmade quilt and some baby toys and some clothes and all kinds of fun things and more information about Down syndrome for when they're ready. We can also provide a parent-to-parent match. We try to match people up that have similar backgrounds. So for example, if somebody has a baby with a heart condition, we will match them with a parent whose child has been through a successful heart repair, so they can answer questions about that. That's my little guy. Isn't he cute? I'm a little biased, but So what is early intervention? You probably hear that term a lot. A lot of you probably know what it is. Some of you work in it already, so I'll give you the brief view. Children with Down syndrome are entitled to receive early intervention services through the regional center, at least here in the Bay Area. I don't know if it differs in other parts of the state and other states, but here in the Bay Area. And that includes infant development, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy. We work in conjunction with the regional center, so we don't provide those therapies, but we pick up where they leave off. We have support groups, we have development classes that are not specifically OT, but that continue to work on skills like speech skills, occupational therapy skills, gross motor skills. So the actual early intervention is going to come through the regional center, but then we pick up where they leave off and provide more opportunities for development. The Department of Developmental Services has a full list of area regional centers on their website. I'm sure if you're in the hospitals or medical facilities, you have them as well. If you do not, for whatever reason, we have them, so you can contact us. So quality of life. Worries about a person with Down syndrome's quality of life are generally unfounded, as are concerns that the person will be a burden to their family. So this is a big concern parents have, like how is this going to affect our family? How is this going to affect the child's siblings? What is this going to do to our dynamic? I know when I had my son, I really didn't know much of anything about Down syndrome at all, and my first thought was, am I still going to be able to travel? Because my family really likes to travel, and am I going to be housebound now? Which, now that he's 5, I recognize that's ridiculous, but at the time, as a new parent, I was like totally confused. So there has been a large-scale study done by Brian Scottco, among other people, out of Boston. I'm sure a lot of you probably are familiar with his research. I believe it was over 2,000 individuals with Down syndrome he talked to, and 99% of people with Down syndrome indicated that they're happy with their lives, and 97% like who they are. Is that not amazing? Do you think 99% of us in this room are actually content? I mean, I think it's pretty awesome. 86% indicated that they make friends easily, and those who struggled tended to live in isolated situations where they didn't have much opportunity for socialization. The average lifespan for a person with Down syndrome is now about 60 to 65 years. That is a big change. When I had my son 5 years ago, I had a nurse come in and say, "Oh, honey, don't worry, they can live to be like 25 now." And I burst into tears because I was like, you mean I'm going to outlive my child? It was terrible. She had old information. A lot of people have old information. Particularly the advances in heart surgery have made that lifespan go way, way up. Every person with Down syndrome has unique abilities. It's really just like any of us in here. We all have unique abilities, right? I'm terrible at math, but I'm good with words. Same thing with people with Down syndrome. They're all going to have their strengths. They're all going to have their weaknesses. And more children with Down syndrome are becoming fully included in school, which enhances their success. They have done a lot of studies that show children with intellectual disabilities, such as Down syndrome, that are included in a typical classroom environment with appropriate support, actually at the end of their schooling end up a couple years ahead of students who are educated in segregated classrooms. So that's a really positive change, and right now the law supports that for kids. And in California, you sometimes have to fight for it, but the law is on your side. The federal law is on your side, so it can be done. So if parents are concerned about that, the law is on their side. They need to know where to go for resources. They may need to push for it, but the law is on their side. And some of us say there's never been a better time to have a child with Down syndrome because there is so much support now that was not available before. The early intervention, the supports in schooling, the advances in medicine. So it really is a good time to have one as opposed to 20, 30 years ago. Adults with Down syndrome can have relationships and marry. They can attend post-secondary schools. It's been a big movement there. There's actually a lot of post-secondary schools, even in California, that have programs for adults with intellectual disabilities. There's one down in Fresno that we hear a lot about because it's pretty close to us. So. They can live semi-independently or independently. They can work at rewarding jobs. They can actively participate in their community. And each person with Down syndrome is unique, so there's no way, particularly if you have a brand new baby in your hospital, that anyone can say what that child is going to grow up to be or do. Common myths. Only women older than age 35 are likely to have a baby with Down syndrome. Not true. 80% of babies with Down syndrome are born to women under the age of 35. And the reason why is because more women under the age of 35 have babies. So more babies being born equals more babies being born with Down syndrome. A child with Down syndrome will have a negative effect on his or her parents. That same Dr. Scott Coe's study showed that 99% of parents in that study report loving their child with Down syndrome, and the divorce rate in families who have a child with Down syndrome is actually lower than in families with a non-disabled child, which is very cool for those of us who have children with Down syndrome. A child with Down syndrome will have a negative effect on his or her siblings. Also false, 97% of siblings of people with Down syndrome reported being proud of their sibling, and 88% think that they are a better person for having a sibling with Down syndrome. I will say my two sons are 4 years apart, and the bond between them is incredible. My younger one is the one with Down syndrome, and my older son is his biggest protector, his biggest fan. He loves everything about him. I don't think he really sees the Down syndrome. He knows that Sam has it, and he knows that it impacts the way he learns things, but it doesn't matter to him. It's just his brother, and it's a wonderful relationship, and we see that in so many of our families. People with Down syndrome are always happy, so I had to put in this picture of my son, who does not like to wear hats, and my husband had just put his little pumpkin hat on, and he was really not happy. He makes that same face if you tell him there's no bacon in the morning. So they experience the same range of emotions as anybody else. Anecdotally, they do tend to be pretty positive, go with the flow people. Of my two kids, the one with Down syndrome is definitely the more happy-go-lucky, but he has his moments, as you can see. God only gives special children to special people. So this one, I think everybody who says this means well, but we found that our parents really don't like hearing it because they feel like they're just ordinary people who this is how their life is, and it's fine, and they're happy with it, but they didn't do anything special that this happened to them. So what we do, we have one-on-one parent mentors for new families, which I talked about. We have support groups for parents, grandparents, and other family members. We have developmental-based classes for infants through adults. So at the infant stage, this really looks like a lot of play with the parents talking, and we bring in speakers on different topics. As they get older, my son's in the age 4 to 7 class, and they do art projects, and they do gross motor activities, and they dance, and they do circle time, and they do calendar, and it kind of is like a school readiness type of thing. And then for our adults, they do a lot of fun activities, but then they also do practical skills, like going out in the community and going to the grocery store and that type of thing. We have a school readiness summer program. That program is amazing. My son participated last year and will again this year. The speech gains are incredible, and I mean not just verbal speech, but assistive AAC device, communication, sign language. They work on wherever the child has the strengths in communication. That's what they work on in a school-type setting. And then they work with the child's educational team at their actual school so that those skills can carry over. We actually just won an award for that program last week. It was very exciting, so very cool. We have an on-site reading teacher. We have music therapy for infants and children. We offer that in the East Bay, the South Bay, and the Peninsula now. We have an on-site feeding and oral placement therapist. We have special events throughout the year, such as seminars, training sessions, camps. Our Medical Outreach Alliance, that's what I do, partnering with the area hospitals to make sure they have the information they need. Our Education Alliance is similar, partnering with the school districts to ensure that we can support our kids in the schools and help the teachers understand how people with Down syndrome tend to learn and be successful in a school environment. So what we don't do, we don't provide early intervention. That's through the regional center. We can definitely connect people with the regional center, though. We also don't turn anyone away. So our services are inclusive for anyone. Family members are always welcome. My older son participates in events all the time, just by virtue of being Sam's brother. And many, many, many of our programs are free. We are grant funded and donation funded. We have a few programs that have cost attached, like that summer program, but when they do, there's always scholarships available. So a family shouldn't feel as if they shouldn't reach out because of financial concerns, because we never turn anyone away, and there is no membership fee. Other resources, Global Down Syndrome Foundation and Lumine Foundation are both doing a lot of research type work in different areas in Down syndrome. National Down Syndrome Congress has a wonderful conference every year. It's going to be in Sacramento this year. I'm very excited. National Down Syndrome Society, they do a lot of advocacy work on behalf of people with Down syndrome and similar intellectual disabilities. Down Syndrome Diagnosis Network, I'm actually on the board of that one. They are a reasonably new organization, about 3 years old, and they provide online parent support through groups. They're a really nice complement to organizations like Down Syndrome Connection because 24/7, there is always someone online. If your kid has that rash that you're worried about, send a picture to your group and somebody's going to answer you and answer your questions and talk you off the ledge. Local family resource networks, they differ depending where you are in the Bay Area, but they're all over. Center for Down Syndrome at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital. I'm sure some of you probably even work there. We get a lot of families from there. Charlie's Clinic at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital in Oakland. I know we have someone here from there. And then the Regional Center for Early Intervention. And that's just my references. And before I wrap up in 17 seconds, I just want to thank everybody here. I will tell you, as a parent, it means so much to have people that actually care about kids in the disability community, adults in the disability community, and are taking the time to learn how to make them a part of the bigger community. So I really appreciate you all.